Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
I'm Ahmed Shabuddin, and you're in the stream. Today, what happens when art and activism collide?
For many, art captures the beauty and pain in the world. For others, it's a type of guerrilla warfare. Colored pencils or paintbrushes replace weapons, allowing artists to examine and critique society.
But can an artist tackle political and social issues without being an activist? Here to discuss that in our studio, we have Steve Lambert, an artist based in New York City. In New York, artist and journalist Molly Crabapple. Joining via Skype in Berlin, Germany, artist Rajkamul Kalan, and in London, British contemporary artist Anya Sand.
Welcome to the stream, everyone. So I want to start here on set with you, Steve. Yeah. Would you consider yourself an activist, and why, or why not?
Well, the reason I became an artist is so I wouldn't have to narrow down what I did. You know, when I found out that art could be whatever I wanted, you know, like we won that battle decades ago, that anything can be art, but you get to decide whether you like it. Then it was like all the things I grew up with, the values that I grew up with about, you know, doing what's right, helping other people, that I could combine that with making work. And so it just freed me to make the work I always wanted to make, and some people call that activist art.
Rajkamal, same question to you. I mean, you heard what Steve said. How would you describe yourself, and does activism play a role in that description?
I have a tremendous respect for activists, but I don't include that in terms of my identity. I see myself as an artist who's making about political and social forms of violence, and then I see my work as sitting next to the work of activists and academics, and somehow cross-pollinating between different communities.
You know, Molly, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this as well, not just personally, because people tweeting in, trying to make a distinction here, saying, for example, all art is political, but being explicitly political can produce an echo chamber around you with no room for other opinions. We also have La Casita Grant saying, but activist art intends to change your perception. Art that is political looks to inform, but not exactly to change the viewer. I'm kind of lost here. It seems like, to me, there are blurred lines. How would you, identify yourself, Molly?
I also have a great amount of respect for activists, but I don't include myself in their number. And the reason is, when I think of an activist, I think of someone who is organizing their workplace, someone who's leading protests, someone who's doing the very, very hard, nitty-gritty work of building and sustaining movements. I draw pictures, and I write articles, and I write books sometimes. And while I am political, and while I'm a politically engaged person because I'm a citizen, I don't want to diminish the work, the very real work that actual activists do by saying that I'm an activist because I'm an artist with opinions. With that said, I think that sometimes there's a real tendency to try to put things into neat little boxes that don't exist in the real world, to try to say either all art is political or nothing political can be art. When in actuality, art is a means of communication that can encompass everything in the whole world, that can be good, that can be terrible, that can be both at once. And art can be political, it can be apolitical, it can be everything.
So art is a means of communication. I want everyone to take a look at my laptop here. I pulled up a piece by one of our guests. This is Anya's work. Anya, I know this installation is about brainwashing. It's about political propaganda, I've heard you describe it as. Can you explain what it is we're looking at? And to you, what are you trying to communicate with it?
Well, this piece is called Maria in Society, Reflection of Our Generation, Part 2. I wanted everyone, first of all, it's an installation in a room where people come in and they feel as they are part of the installation, including the shadows, and each mannequin is wrapped into a theme, whether it's politics, religion, beliefs, superstitions, social media. I just wanted people to stop and think for once, how much do those means affect us, and how much they direct us in our thinking and our action, And is it the reality that we want to see, or is it the reality that is actually out there? I just wanted people to be able to open their mind to real things and stop being so judgmental and one way directed where nothing else exists. I just want them to look at the real world, at people for what they are and for what it is. I also don't quite agree with the word activist, because to me it's quite a limiting term. Also, in my understanding, it's very aggressive. I think as an artist, for me, I want to make people think, to stop and analyze their lives.
Yeah, Anya, I have to tell you, in the studio here, as you used the word aggressive, he started laughing.
Well, I think we're like too narrowly defining what an artist is and what an activist is, and like nobody likes to be labeled either. But when we think about activism as affecting like policy or legislation, right? Like then it's like, well, I'm not really qualified. That's not what I studied. But as an artist, I affect culture, and culture has a bigger effect on politics than, I would argue, than policy or legislation, right? Like there's laws that keep you from jaywalking, but the culture doesn't support it, right? And so as artists, we're affecting culture, and that kind of gets back to one of the viewers, which was that all of this stuff is political. It all has political ramifications.
And of course it does, and just as Anya was talking, Malika, about the difference between perception and reality and how we all like to identify ourselves, Molly, yourself as well, I just came to one person, a multimedia artist on Twitter, who wrote to us, Amy Davis Roth, who said, an artist has to be brave, honest, diligent, and be prepared for pushback. Now, wouldn't an activist need to do the same? And so, these lines, it starts to make you wonder. I mean, let me come to you, Molly, again. Hanna Joranen says to us, there's a difference how art audience, critics, and institutions value activists and artists. Is this about how society values the two?
I wouldn't say it's that. I think that all sorts of people have to be brave and honest and prepared for pushback, from scientists to journalists to activists to artists. These are just qualities that anyone who wants to affect change in the world has to do. The reason that I don't identify as an activist is purely because I guess I just see the actual on-the-ground work that activists do, and I know I don't do it myself. And in terms of art changing culture, this is something I think about a lot. I always wrestle with, can art change the world, or is art some sort of niche hobby for me, like whittling sailboats or something? And the reason I do believe that art can change the world is I believe that people do things based on stories, on the stories they tell themselves about who they are, on the stories they tell themselves about the world they want to live in. And sometimes, at our best, we can give them those stories, and we can inspire acts of courage. We can inspire moments of real bravery and sacrifice and greatness. And I think that when we look at art in this sense too, we have to break out of the definition as an artist merely being someone who makes a piece of work that is exhibited in a white-walled cube in Chelsea and then is sold for a lot of money to a Russian oligarch. I mean, when I talk about an artist, I mean someone who is creating visual culture. And
Chelsea, for our international audience, being in a neighborhood in New York City, you mentioned, can art change the world, being one of the questions that's sometimes asked. I want us all to take a look at this piece of art. This is one of Raj Komal's latest works. It's called Peoples of Afghanistan. Now, this video was created as part of that larger work. Take a look.
People walking out of the building right now, getting into vehicles, so we need to speed up the timeline if we can.
We're going as fast as we can, crew.
Roger that, we're going as fast as we can.
Engineer copies.
I think that might be the rectangle building.
Through on wildfire, just to confirm, you're not clear to fire.
So Raj Kamal, we see aerial footage of what looks like a war scene with other pictures transposed over. What are we looking at?
So this video represents an installation that I created this year called Peoples of Afghanistan. And what the footage that you're looking at is open source, available online. It was posted around 2002, and it represents American bombing footage of an AC-130 gunship ship. It's high-resolution thermal imagery of American pilots choosing targets to bomb in Afghanistan. And then superimposed, you have portraits that were taken as part of an anthropometric survey by a Russian anthropologist in the 1960s, G.F. Debitz, and his work. There was a lot of statistical analysis measuring people's skin color, eye color, skulls, body shape, and all of this was then published by Harvard's Peabody Museum in 1970. And so for me, I've been looking at anthropology as a discipline that helped create certain forms of violence that we're still living with. And so for me, it was an experiment of putting the two types of footage together, one contemporary and one dating back to the 60s.
So Steve, she mentioned anthropology. There are a lot of hats that we've already mentioned right here. Do you see yourself as an anthropologist of sorts?
I think in order to be effective, like communicating with people, you have to understand them and then try to speak in a language that they can understand. So those disciplines definitely overlap. Yeah.
Has there ever been a point where you had a piece where you feel like the audience didn't take away from it what you wanted them to take away from it?
Yeah.
What happens? Can you describe what happened there?
That's the beautiful thing about art versus propaganda, right? If I was making propaganda, there would be an idea that I had, and then I would want people, the audience, to understand it exactly as I intended. But what's great about art is you can have that layer, and then you can have another layer and another layer of different kinds of meanings. You can even have the piece sort of appear to mean the opposite of what you intend, and allow the intelligence of the viewer to, and their interpretation to come to it. The cop-out is like, oh, well, I'll just let the audience, whatever they think is what it means to them. Mm-hmm. And I think with artists that have political ambitions, you need to aspire a little higher and be more specific, right? So we describe it as, at the Center for Artistic Activism, we talk about like a light shining into a prism. So when you shine a bright light into a prism, you get the rainbow coming out the other side. If it's not a focused intention going into the work, you don't get the rainbow and spectrum of meaning coming out the other side.
And when you talk about intention,
if I can just
yes, please, Raj Kamal. I mean, go ahead. I was going to come to you anyway.
I was just I was going to add on to what Steve just said, because there was something about putting these two types of footage together that produced something unexpected for me. So when I was looking at this 1960s anthropological data, I had a very specific response to it in terms of a really kind of horrific scientific project. But once it was overlaid onto the bombing footage, suddenly you start to identify with these if they're the ones that are getting bombed. And that footage shifts over into looking like a great humanitarian project, which was never something that I expected. But always when you play with materials, there's this, there's different types of meaning that get produced that you're not always, that you can't be in control of.
Mm. And then also so often a piece reads very differently depending on who the viewer is. One of my favorite contemporary artists now is a street artist named Tatiana Fazlilizadeh. Her most famous series is called Stop Telling Women to Smile.
I love that piece. I love it. It makes me smile when I hear the name of it because I love it and I relate to it.
So she just did another piece. She's from Oklahoma City originally. And as I think so many of us are, she was very angered by the election of the tangerine donkey to the presidency. So she did a bunch of portraits of her
Colorful words by an artist and journalist, Molly Crabapple. But keep going.
Tangerine donkey. So she did a bunch of portraits of her friends, you know, many of whom are people of color. And then she got the side of a building in Oklahoma City, and she had these portraits, these like tough, beautiful people. And then she wrote on it, she said, America is black, America wears a hijab, America speaks Spanish, America is a migrant, we're here and we're not going anywhere. And you know, if you're, let's say, a young person of color in Oklahoma City, you can see that and you could say, yeah, we're not going anywhere. It's like speaking to you. But let's say you're some bigot who voted for Trump. It's a confrontation.
And you know, I can't help but think of, you know, what you mentioned about intention, how important intention is, and then Raj Kamal, you know, just seeing your work, obviously there's political implications, if not a statement or a message, and the reason I bring that up is because we just got a tweet from Bea on Twitter saying, I think Mahmoud Al-Kurd makes raw, thought-provoking, and marvelous statements about the situation in Gaza, for example. I'm just going to scroll down here. This is his work, his photography. And, you know, whether this is powerful for you, just, you know, out of context even, I just think it's interesting, you know, that a lot of people are trying to decide whether something is political or if it's intended to be, how much intention factors in. And Nora Rahimian saying none of us exist outside of political context, so art that isn't political is actually just hegemony. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think if the default is you're making artwork for galleries and museums, that's how at least I was taught here in the United States. It's like, you know, unless you make a decision otherwise, that's sort of the pathway of success. And it's very sort of limiting for artists and also disempowering to think that, you know, because so few people can actually do that. And then what you can do in the spaces of galleries and museums actually is also very limiting, as opposed to like working within movements. And I think this is like where artists have a lot of power, is bringing the creativity in the way that they think, not just like make this pretty, but a whole approach to activism. So movements, you know, like when they think of activism, it actually really falls back on tradition. There's a tradition of marches and sit-ins and you know, petitions, things like that, right? And so activist movements and big institutions even really have this crisis where they have a hard time imagining, one, the world that they're trying to make, which artists are very good at, and then also new ways of getting there. And we end up repeating things that worked in the past that were once creative, right? But are no longer really, when you repeat them over and over again over decades, they're not
so innovative anymore.
Right?
I like what you're saying because it merges pretty well with a video comment we got from a member of our community. This is Jay Price, and she picks up on what you're mentioning. Anya, I'm going to direct this to you. Have a listen to what she said.
I think art is the politically or socially acceptable form of rebellion. This doesn't sound particularly anarchistic or glamorous, but I think in its mundane position in society, it's an incredibly powerful tool that we often overlook. Art has the capacity to suspend its viewer for just that brief moment and offer a new perspective. And to do that with the theme of politics in your work can open up conversations that may not have been had without that viewing.
So Anya, she terms it as a form of rebellion. How do you know when a work of your art has successfully become an act of rebellion, if that is indeed how you view it? How do you term success for yourself?
Well, first of all, I believe that art has a huge power to penetrate our beings and to affect us, to make us think and hopefully discuss and act on it. When I see my work being successful is when I get the comments like, oh, there's no way we cannot show this work at the gallery, not because we have an against it, but because we do not want any association.
Wow. So people are honest about that. Galleries are open and honest with the reason why they don't want you showing there.
Yeah, they are because they have clients, they want to sell their works, right? So they cannot show something where they can be, that would lead them to be associated with a political person or against that political person. So when you get those responses, you know that this is a strong piece, and but you're also very frustrated and angry because there's no means or ways to show it.
I think artists understand that galleries are not neutral places. You know, that you're not just going there and presenting work and then people come and consider it out of, like it is a white box and they try to eliminate all the context visually, but it does have a context, and it's like really high-end retail shop for rich people. And that's the shame about thinking that as the venue for art. You know, museums are just like a further extension of that.
Raj Kamal, I see you. Raj Kamal, I see you nodding again. And I've been thinking of coming to you because, as I told you, we had not just that tweet from Nora, but also Johnny J responding to a question we put out there asking other artists if they feel that there's something they wish the world knew about creating political art. She says that your art, especially for native artists, is only viewed as political because your very existence is a form of resistance. Now, I know maybe that doesn't, apply in your case directly, but what do you make of that? That your very existence is a form of resistance, just like the work we showed from the photographer in Gaza.
Well, I guess there's two things I want to say. One is that I was recently on this panel on decolonization and the arts in Berlin. And there's a performance artist that's UK-based named Raju Rage. And they did a performance, and part of it, they read a quotation about Black POC, so people of color, queer and trans artists. They make work as a survival strategy, and it's not as opposed to a luxury good. So that's like one thing that I guess that touches on that tweet. But I wanted to kind of bring the conversation a little bit towards this idea that, like, for me personally, I resisted the frame of being a political artist, of making political work for many, many years. Only recently did I come to understand that my work was political. But I think the reason for the resistance is that I've always, through my work, been trying to expand what this frame means. I think there's a general misconception or an idea of political art as being something that tells you what to think, ideologically based. It doesn't allow any room for questions. And for me, I'm very much trying to deal with histories of violence, but I'm trying to deal with bringing emotions, the visceral and embodiment in. And so the body is placed very squarely into how we understand politics. And I think that that's something that's not often this almost like feminization of politics almost isn't often included in the frame. So I just wanted to kind of make that point.
Molly, can you relate at all to what Raj Kamal is saying?
Oh God, it's the way that she phrased it is perfect. I mean, there's an idea that if you're a political artist that you're expected to draw, I don't know, Soviet realist pictures of like the workers marching into the glorious future, or like lots of upraised fists, or, something that's simple, something that doesn't allow complexity and fraughtness and all of the complications of being human. And so I think for that reason, a lot of people are like, well, I'm a complicated, rebellious person. That's why I became an artist, and I want to be able to keep doing that, and so I don't consider myself political. Whereas, in actuality, I think that you can view it as equally political to create art that expands the boundaries of what is possible, of what is sayable, that shows people things that they never knew existed. I think that one of the tools of bigotry and one of the tools of fascism is actually cliché. It's the stereotyping of other human beings, the simplifying of them into neat little boxes that can then be disposed of. And I think that one of the things that art is most powerful for is showing that the world is far more complicated and humans are far more complicated than one could ever have imagined, and of smashing through that simplicity that these authoritarians and these fascists like to foist on us.
Steve,
and if I could just add,
go ahead, Raj Kamal.
Okay, just to add to that, and also push the boundary of what the show is. The show is about the kind of meeting point between art and activism. But I also think that there's a space within this conversation where to see the artist as healer, and a spiritual space within this kind of political transformational work. And so I just wanted to add that.
I love that. It's a perfect summary of what we've been discussing. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We have to pause the conversation here, but we will keep it going online. Stream.aljazeera.com.
Of course, much more to come in the next 30 minutes there, including this from Nora Rahimian. Check this out.
I think it's cool. It's trendy for artists to be activists. More and more fans expect artists to speak up and say things and have a voice and opinion. I think the problem is when those artists are perpetuating systems of oppression, when that speaking up is exploitative or capitalistic. And so the real question is, how do we make sure that there's impact, and how do we hold artists accountable for what they're saying?